thank you guys for being here for my third week of my talking about my writing and publishing story. I did want to talk today about getting an agent because that is it's definitely something that I get asked about a whole lot. But before I do that, I just wanted to tell you a few more just brass tacks things about how I write and the process and sort of what works for me. Because I think one of the really important things to know about yourself, whether you're able to lean into it or not, is to know when you're most creative. And so for me, unfortunately, I'm most creative in like the middle of the night. Maybe not the middle of the night, but like late at night. There's something about that time around like 10:30 to midnight where I don't know, I'm like kind of sleepy and my reserves are a little bit down and I'm not overthinking everything and the day is sort of quieted down a little bit and it's not as busy. And I feel like I have my best ideas then, and I feel like I get my best kind of character voices then, which is super unfortunate because, you know, I have to like function in the real world and I can't stay up all night every night writing books. So I have rules for myself, especially when I'm working on a new book. I'll let myself get up late at night like a few times and write whatever's in my head and kind of get it out onto the page. Because the sort of scary thing that I've learned is that I often can't recapture that. Like when I have that voice in my head or I have that just moment of inspiration, I can't necessarily get it back. Even if I take notes for myself really quickly, sometimes just like the way that the words flow on the page, it's just not the same. But again, I'm glad that I know that about myself, but that doesn't necessarily mean that I get to utilize it a lot. I can also tell you when I am least creative, which is super early in the morning. I am just so not a morning person, and I've tried. And I mean, obviously I get up in the morning, I, have a child and take him to school and all of those things. But I bow down to those of you in the 5 a.m. Writers Club because I have no interesting or important words at 5 in the morning. I can't do it. And you would think it would be similar, like that you're kind of in that zone where you're like a little bit between sleeping and waking and the world hasn't quite gotten you yet. You would think that the creativity would be the same in the morning as it is at night, but for me, it's not. But for a lot of you, I'm sure it is. And so that's really cool. So for me, now that writing is like my full-time gig, I try to write as early in the morning as I can, not like 5 a.m. Because of course, if I was a diligent and disciplined person, I could get up early in the morning and try to make that happen. But I try to start my pages like in the morning after my son has gone to school. And when I'm really writing a first draft, I'm pretty serious about it. Like I tell people who, are likely to need to get in touch with me, if you need to talk to me between 8 and 10, or sometimes even 8 and 11, you're going to have to call me on the phone because I'm not looking at texts, I'm not looking at emails. And it has been very, very clear to me that once the day gets going, once I'm answering texts, once I'm responding to emails, once I'm having Zooms and meetings and like my attention is pulled in all these different ways, it's not that I can't come back to writing. I can. And often, I have to because I might be on a deadline and I have something that I have to finish. And so I have to have double writing sessions in a day. But it is much better for me, I have found, if I can kind of get my words in the morning before everything else is taken over. It's much more efficient. I get so much more written. I can get, I usually have a goal of like 2,000 to 3,000 words a day. Sometimes if I'm on a really tight deadline, more. But I can generally tend to get that done in those 2 to 3 hours. Whereas if I start my day with the texts and the emails, it could take me twice as long. So that's just a little tip for me to you. Just that's not that that's your best writing time. It's just mine. And I think if you can figure out what that is for you and how it works into your life and how it fits into your schedule, then that's awesome. And of course, there are a lot of you that are, going to be writing on your lunch break or writing when you get home from work or school or whatever you're doing. And that's great too. And I certainly want to tell you, I've mentioned this before, but I wrote my first book with a tiny brand newborn baby, and the next couple with, a small little toddler. There was not a lot of consistency. There was not, oh, I know this is going to be my writing time today. I just wrote when I could, and there's nothing wrong with that. And to be totally honest with you, sometimes I think that produces your best work because you are using what you have. And so when you sit down to spill out onto the page, we're not wasting any words. And so sometimes I think that's even better. So if that's your situation, great, utilize it. But as I said, I did want to talk about getting an agent today. And I got my agent in 2012, my first agent in 2012. And so sometimes I feel like my advice is not even relevant because it has been so long. So again, this is not necessarily what I'm saying you should do. And I'm sure there are lots of great resources out there that I don't know about. And so this is just my story. It's how I did it. It's what happened for me. And I think it still works if, you want to do it though. But I'm also sure there are lots of better resources out there than me for getting an agent. But it's really funny to think about that time because 2012 doesn't feel like it was very long ago. It doesn't even sound long ago, but I remember like when I first started writing query letters to literary agents. Well, first of all, the very first thing I did was I bought this big fat book at my local bookstore, and it was called Jeff Herman's Guide to Literary Agents. I did look it up. There is a new version. Jeff Herman is still publishing that guide. And I don't know about you guys, the internet was super helpful in the process, but I'm such a paper person. What a shock. I like to have something physical. And so I had that big fat book, and I would go through and I would highlight and sticky flag every agent who represented women's fiction, basically. And especially, I gave a lot of priority to people who I knew published authors that I loved. And here's a little helpful tip for you. If no one's ever told you this before, which this is probably 101 and you all know this, but to give you an example. So this is A Happier Life. This is my book that's coming out in June. I cannot wait. But in the acknowledgments, authors pretty much always thank their literary agent. I write very long acknowledgments, so this is kind of funny, but I wrote a little bit of kind of my author's note in my acknowledgments this time too. But I actually didn't say my agent, but I said, speaking of treasures, Elizabeth Weed, you certainly are one. Thanks for the million little things you do for each and every book, from negotiating contracts to hosting epic dinner parties. All I can say is that Rebecca St. James would want tips from you. So that is my literary agent. And so, for example, if you think I write books like Kristy Woodson Harvey, then a good thing to do is go get one of my books, open it up, look at the acknowledgments, and see who I'm thanking as my agent. And then, when you're writing to agents, I think it is really helpful to be specific about why you're writing to them. And so for me, if I had my book and I had my little list, but I knew, for example, if there was an agent that, let's say it was Ellen Hildebrand's agent, and I loved Ellen Hildebrand, and I thought that, she wrote Summer Beach books and I wrote Summer Beach books, then I would write her agent and say, I'm writing to you because I'm a huge fan of Ellen Hildebrand, and I think that my books would fit in a similar genre as hers, whatever it is. And that doesn't have to be the reason that you're writing them. You could say, I saw your recent interview in Writer's Digest, and I felt like what you said about the relationship between authors and agents was amazing, and that's exactly what I'm looking for. Whatever it is, it doesn't matter. But what I did back then, and what I think still holds true today, is that agents are just like everyone else, and they want to know that you're not just sending them a form letter. And on your end of things, you want to know that you're reaching out with your precious prized baby to someone who is going to be a good fit for you and for your work. So I went through that big old book, and I made myself a spreadsheet of, all the agents that I wanted to reach out to and their email addresses, and then what they required or what they requested in their submission packet. So sometimes people just want your query letter. Sometimes they want your query letter in 10 pages. Sometimes they want a synopsis. But I think this is really important. Even though I had that information from the book, that changes a lot. And sometimes agents are open and closed to submissions at different times. And the last thing that you want is to send a submission into an agent who's closed for submissions, but you don't know they're closed to submissions. And then you never hear back. So you just think it's a no when really they were closed, so they just tossed your submission. So every time before I went to go submit to an agent, I would go to their website and I would make sure they were open to submissions. I would double check what they wanted in the submission package, because I think that stuff's important. You don't want to just send them a bunch of stuff that they're not asking for. But what I also think is really funny is that in 2012, when I was doing this, there were some agents that I would email, but there were a lot of agents that I was still like printing off my query letter on my Kristy Woodson Harvey letterhead, which was so pretty. I feel kind of nostalgic for those days, and put them in an envelope and take them in. I actually remember two different full manuscript requests that I had that I literally printed the manuscript out and like took it to the post office and mailed it. And that just felt really cool. But anyway, so yeah, that's all I did. I mean, I went through, I made my spreadsheet, I wrote my query letters, I tried to be as specific as possible. But the other thing that I had done, or that I had told myself, is I wrote myself my query letter. And then I decided, I think I gave myself like a number of 10. And I decided if I hadn't gotten any requests for at least a partial or something like that, that I needed to rewrite my query letter because it just wasn't jumping out at people in the way that it needed to. So I think that's always a good thing to have in the back of your mind is don't just, send every single query letter at exactly the same time. Because one, it would be exhausting, but two, then if something's not working, you don't have the opportunity to kind of give yourself a second chance to make that first impression. So again, I think there are easier ways to manage this now. I'm sure that there are. I'm sure someone has figured it out. But those are just that's what I did back in the dark ages when I got my first agent. And I think it still works. And I do always tell people, I was this girl sitting in Eastern North Carolina. I didn't know any authors. I didn't know anyone in publishing. I had no contacts. And I told myself for a long, long time that I was never going to be an author because everybody that was published was in New York City and they all knew people. And of course, there are plenty of people in New York City that know people that are getting published. But I just like to say I was literally cold querying agents. And so if that is your situation, don't worry. It doesn't mean that you aren't going to get one. You might have to send a few more, but it doesn't mean that you aren't going to get one. So if you are getting ready for your agent search, good luck. I'm proud of you. It's going to be great. And just remember, you only need one yes, and rejection is part of the process. So it never feels good, but it's a part of the process, and every no is getting you closer to your yes. So good luck.